Good afternoon. It is December 7th, 2018. We're here today with Mike Rush. I'm Deb Lawrence, and this is for the Whitley County Oral History Project. Thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
We were just talking a minute ago about the courthouse. I get to go see the courthouse next week, and you were saying something about the dome?
The courthouse was built, the cornerstone was laid in 1888. And at that time, there was no electricity to illuminate the inner parts of the courthouse, or quite honestly, any place else.
Mm-hmm.
And the architect, if you look at the outside of the building, there is an outside dome. At the base of that dome, you will find 12 windows, 3 on each of the 4 sides that are parallel to the 4 streets around the courthouse. Those windows admitted light, and that light was picked up by opaque glass in an inner dome. Some people don't realize there are 2 domes there.
No.
One's inside, and one is the one that you see from the outside. The light would filter through that opaque glass down to the first floor to illuminate all the way to the first floor. Through the opaque glass in the floor of the 3rd floor, the opaque glass in the 2nd floor, it would filter all the way down to the 1st floor to give light to the inner parts of the courthouse that didn't have windows.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's how they did it at that time.
Wow.
I vividly remember that. I've been around here for a long time. And eventually that inner dome started leaking, some birds got in and created some problems. And so they took all that inner glass out of the internal dome. And it left the framework, the ribs of that dome, and then put all that was filled in with, to the best of my knowledge, some type of board of some sort. And they painted it, made it look real nice, and that's what you see today.
Wow.
So there's no light coming in, but it's not necessary anymore because there are electric lights there.
Well, that's really cool. I love that.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
So, tell us how you became a judge.
The story probably needs to go back to my days in the United States Army.
Sure.
I was in from 1968 to 1970.
Well, thank you for your service.
My pleasure. Glad to have come through in one piece. Not everybody did in those days.
Right.
I was not in Vietnam, and I was really never in harm's way. But I got acquainted with an Army lawyer. I already had a bachelor's degree, and he was telling me about his career as a captain in the Judge Advocate General Corps. And we got to talking about law and philosophy and a variety of things. I was enlisted. Our wives taught school together there. Anyway, that piqued my interest, and so while I was still at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, I took the law school admission test and passed it, apparently, because I was admitted to a law school at Valparaiso University. That was my #1 choice, and so I withdrew my other applications and started law school in the fall of 1970, graduated 3 years later, and came back to Columbia City and practiced law here for a little over 18 years.
Wow.
That was a broad spectrum law practice. In a small town, you pretty much did about everything that small town lawyers would do. And we had a very fine judge by the name of Patricia McNagny.
Yeah.
What a lady.
She was cool.
Wonderful family. She came from, she was a Gates. And for many, many years, there was a law firm here, Gates and Gates. And her husband, Phil McNagny, joined that law firm later and became Gates, Gates and McNagny. And anyway, she was elected to be the very first judge of the Whitley Superior Court. Prior to that, we had a court here known as the Noble Whitley County Court. Noble Whitley County Court. And that court began back in the idea for that concept started back in the mid-1970s. And through legislation, there was first appointed a judge named Jerry Carson. And Jerry Carson was from Noble County. You had to be from either Noble County or Whitley County to be in the Noble Whitley County Court. And the county court basically did the kind of cases that some of the town courts used to do in the city courts. Did a lot of low-level misdemeanor crimes. Very little in the way of civil work other than collection type things, small claim type things. And it kind of took the place of the Columbia City Court, because we had a city court here for
See,
years.
you don't think about that. At least growing up, when we did, I didn't realize there were town courts.
Yes.
Wow.
And there still are a few around the state, and but we had a city court here for years, and none of which were presided over by people who had law degrees. One of them, I remember, was Jack Squires, was the judge there.
Jeweler.
He was a jeweler.
Oh my goodness.
But he got elected to the job. He didn't have to have a law degree.
Oh my goodness.
Joe Zickgraff. Joe was at one time the Justice of the Peace, and he kind of transitioned, if you will, into being the Columbia City Court judge.
Oh my gracious.
Yeah. So that goes back several years ago. But that was all phased out when the Indiana legislature created the Whitley Superior Court. Now that's the court over which I presided.
Okay.
And so I've been asked many times, what's the difference between a circuit court and a superior court? And I'm going to get around to answering your question how I wound up with this job.
Alrighty.
But this goes back to the days when the state first got started. Our state constitution started and became promulgated in 1816. And to some degree, it was patterned after the federal constitution. 3 branches of government, and one of them, of course, was the judicial branch. And at that time, there were 2 levels of courts, the Indiana Supreme Court and the circuit courts.
Okay.
So circuit courts are basically, in the state of Indiana, are created by the Constitution of the state of Indiana. And have you ever heard the phrase, riding the circuit? That's exactly what the first judges did. They literally rode the circuit. They went to different counties. There were not nearly the number of people that there are now. They didn't have as many lawyers. They didn't have as many cases. There wasn't that much for a judge to do in one county like there is now. And so Whitley County was one of it, between 5 and 8 counties, depending on which compendium you read about the history of the circuit courts. And Whitley County was in the 8th Circuit.
Okay.
And that consisted primarily of northeast Indiana counties, between 5 and 8, depending on which historian you want to listen to. And one judge would literally ride that circuit.
Wow.
And go from one county to another and take care of whatever business needed to be taken care of. As the state grew and more issues came up, more lawsuits, more lawyers were looking for cases, and people were looking for the lawyers to handle those cases. Then it became necessary to have, and eventually it did happen, that each county had its own circuit court.
Okay.
Superior courts are created by the Indiana legislature, and they are not superior to circuit courts. They are co-equal with them.
Mm-hmm.
They have the very same jurisdiction, with a very few exceptions, as the circuit court has. And they call it the superior court because that court was superior over all of the various courts that are replaced.
Oh,
which could
okay.
be city and town courts and justices of the peace, that type
Mm-hmm.
of thing. So it's just superior to the courts that it replaced. So back in the early 1980s, in this state, the Whitley Superior Court was created by statute. And the only difference between the Whitley Circuit Court and the Whitley Superior Court is, obviously how it got started,
Mm-hmm.
one by constitution, one by legislature. But when they created the Superior Court, the judge of the Circuit Court preferred that that court retain juvenile court jurisdiction. And so and the legislature went along with that. In fact, Potch Wheeler was a senator, and he thought that was a good idea because he knew the judge there. It was Edward Myers at the time. And so that's how the circuit court retained exclusive jurisdiction over juvenile matters.
Okay.
So, but otherwise, the circuit and superior courts can do exactly the same thing. Out of judicial economy, the Superior Court also had a small claims division. It still does.
Mm-hmm.
And they handle, in that court, all the small claims where people could come to court without having to have lawyers assisting them. The first judge of the Whitley Superior Court was Patricia McNagny. She was, I believe, elected in 1982, and she served until 1991, when, for health reasons, she had to retire. She had some health issues prior to that, and she came back for a while. And while she was away, a local lawyer, Jim Fleck, a lot of people know Jim here, he volunteered to take over that court until she was able to come back, and Jim did that for several months. So when Judge McNagny felt that she could not do it anymore because of her health, then the call went out. Anybody that would be interested in becoming the next judge, which would be the second judge of the Whitley Superior Court, put your application in with the governor, and the governor then appointed. And I happened to be the one that got appointed, and I started in 1991, at the time that she had to retire. And I did that until the end of December of 2010. So just a little short of 20 years that I was the judge of that court.
Yeah.
So does that give you some idea of how this all happened?
It's just really cool.
Yeah.
Really cool.
When I took over, the Superior Court was actually in the old Relic Room. Now, some of the old-timers will know what the Relic Room was, and that was a room that was on the northwest corner of the third floor of the courthouse, which is now the Superior Court Judge's office or chambers. But it was just packed full of old relics from the county, arrowheads, tomahawk heads, all kinds of rifles. A lot of that stuff was stored there before we had the Whitley County Historical Society. Well, across the hall from that, the Relic Room, was the court library. Now, in the old days, they didn't have computers and everything online, and you could look up the law off of your computer.
Mm-hmm.
They had a big Quonset hut ceiling, if that's the kind of
yeah,
curved
sure.
ceiling. That in that room where the Superior Court is now was the law library for Whitley County. And it was just full of bookshelf, just like you have here in the library, completely filled up with old law books. And I will tell you, Deb, I doubt very much if any of them were ever even opened.
Oh, no.
I'm sure some were back in the day.
Right, sure.
But some of those books, if you opened them up, they crack because they were so old and they hadn't ever been opened. So we decided, and the county commissioners who own the courthouse, the Board of Commissioners owns the county property, we decided we would convert the old law library into the Superior Courtroom. And I think it was Deb Baer, Deb Howenstein, Barb Howenstein, and Chick Harker were the county commissioners at the time, and they were a dream to work with, and they went right along with what we needed and worked out very nicely.
Oh, it's a beautiful courtroom.
Yes, it is. And a lot of people don't realize this, but when the circuit court first started being in operation, which was probably within roughly 2 years after the cornerstone was laid. We believe that they started hearing cases and the courthouse was open for business in about 1890.
Okay.
There was a bench in the courtroom. That bench was there for years and years and years. When Edward Myers was the circuit court judge, he decided to remodel the circuit courtroom, which was the only courtroom at the time. So he remodeled it. They took the old bench out. By then it was covered with lacquer and all kinds of things.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And they put it in storage right next to where the Relic Room is. And that's where Superior Court staff have their offices now. That was in there for a long time. Eventually, Judge McNagny took that bench and put it in what is now the Superior Court Judge's office, or chambers, and that was the Superior Courtroom for several years. And there was one long table, and all the parties sat at that table and faced the judge, and they were using the old circuit court bench in there because it existed. It didn't look very nice, and it had a kind of a leather top on it that had been marred up over the years. But we decided to use that bench and have it completely refurbished. And that was done by a cabinet company in Largo. They took it out, they took it apart, they put it in some type of a chemical bath, got all the corroded,
all the old goo,
everything that was on that bench, and they brought it back when it was time to install it. They put a witness stand on one side of it, and the court reporter stand on the other, held it all together with strips of wood to kind of a molding that looked like it's all one piece. And so the judge of the Whitley Superior Court, and I was the first to sit at that new bench, is actually sitting at the original bench that started being used in about 1890 in the circuit courtroom.
Oh, that is so cool.
Same one.
I'll be sure to get a picture of that when I get my tour.
It's down to the natural wood now, and it's beautiful.
Wow.
There's a lot of walnut. I think somebody said there's some maple in it. But it's a beautiful piece of furniture, really.
I'll keep my eye out for that.
So that courtroom, as it exists now, was dedicated on Law Day of 1992, May 1st. We started that project right after I took the bench. We started that process. And the very first couple of jury trials that I've handled, or over which I presided, we had no place to do that.
Oh.
So we went to the city hall across the street, up on the 3rd floor where the police station is now, still the city hall, but they let us use the third floor, and we did our first jury trials there.
Wow.
So I know Potch Wheeler was there, and he spoke, and Mrs. Rush's third grade class was there to see how they all sat on the floor inside the bar. So it was a nice opportunity for the public to see the room. And we eventually have some old photographs that are blown up that were at one time in the old Farmers Loan and Trust Bank, which was eventually torn down, and the county government building is there now. They had those pictures in there. I remember seeing them years and years ago, and they donated them to the Whitley County Historical Society because they show pictures of old Columbia City.
Sure, sure.
Well, I happen to know the Historical Society had those large photographs. They were not framed, but we made a nice deal with the Historical Society. They're on, because they were given to them, they can't give them away.
Oh,
but they
cool.
are on permanent loan to the Whitley Superior
Court.
There you go. They're on permanent loan to the Whitley Superior Court. And Denny Finker, who was the custodian for many years at the courthouse, he built frames to go around them, and he and I hung them up after he got it all done. So, and they're still there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
On the south wall is a picture of the second Whitley County Courthouse that was eventually torn down so that the existing courthouse could be constructed. You might be interested to know that the bell, there was a bell up at the top of the second courthouse. Yeah. And before they tore it down, that bell would strike on the hours. They kept the bell and put it in the new courthouse. And so it's the same bell that was in the second courthouse is still being rung on the hour, and literally generations of Whitley County citizens have heard that same bell striking the hours.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
You had asked me about the difference between circuit court and appellate court. Well, they're two different animals. Originally, there was no appellate court in our original Constitution. There was just a Supreme Court. And so eventually they needed an intermediate level of appeals. Instead of going from the trial court straight to the Supreme Court, it was developed a concept of an appellate court.
Okay.
And there are 15 judges on that. There are 5 different panels of 3 judges each. And I know they're staying very busy.
So if you lose your case in the circuit court
or superior
court, then you appeal it actually to the appellate court before it goes to the state Supreme Court.
Correct.
Okay.
Very, very few exceptions to that. There are some rules that allow you to go straight to the Supreme Court, but that's rarely done. If you take it to the Court of Appeals, they can resolve that appeal. And if you don't like the decision that the appellate court made, you can ask the Supreme Court to take it, but they don't have to.
Okay.
They can, if you ask them to review the Court of Appeals decision, they will consider it. If they think there's a good reason to vacate this appellate court decision and make a new order or new judgment, they can do that.
Okay.
But they also don't have to do it. It's not required.
Okay.
Their call.
So are you still listening to cases?
Yes.
Are you?
Yes. We have in Indiana a concept known as senior judges. When I first started as a judge, my hair was a lot darker than it is now. And so I'm a senior judge in every respect. But senior judges are appointed by the Indiana Supreme Court. They are not elected. It's an appointment, and it's an appointment that you have to request every year if you want to continue being a senior judge for the ensuing year.
Okay.
And I've already done that for next year. I intend to do this one more year anyway. But the idea is you can ask the Supreme Court to appoint you or reappoint you as a senior judge. But you also have to put the names and phone numbers and addresses of 3 lawyers that have appeared before you during the present year. In case the Supreme Court wants to check with them, is Judge Rush still got it?
He hadn't lost his marbles or anything.
And so they don't have to appoint. They can say, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that now. But unless there's a good reason not to, they typically will reappoint senior judges because we're needed. We fill in for other judges if there's a conflict of interest, if there's a judge is ill, on vacation. They can keep right on with the court's docket. They don't have to dumb it down.
Okay.
Or continue everything. It's things that the old timers like me have seen for years and years. And we're able to take care of business. So yes, I've been doing that since 2011.
Wow.
And how much longer I do it remains to be seen. But it's very nice to not have to do it full time. We don't have to deal with senior judges with budgets and personnel issues and county council appearances and that sort of thing. We just go do our jobs. The staffs in the various courts that we go to are just very helpful and very considerate of us. They prepare orders that we make, and then we sign them and go home.
Now, do you just stay in Whitley County then as a senior judge?
I am in all the counties contiguous to Whitley County except Allen County. I've elected not to go to do my work over there.
I don't think I'd go there either.
And occasionally they really need somebody in LaGrange County because they can't go north to get a senior judge. They have to have an Indiana.
Yeah.
They have to have an Indiana judge. And I have been to Steuben County as well because they've got Ohio on the east and Michigan on the north.
Right.
So sometimes you have to go a little farther than maybe you would want to, just to make sure that judicial services are available.
Okay.
If the judge can't be there.
All right. So how do I put this? Are there any interesting or funny cases that you can tell us that you may discuss? I mean, I realize.
Yeah, some of them obviously should not be discussed.
Right.
They're very personal to some people. I do remember a lady coming into a small claims court where I handled the small claims for all those years. And she was an older lady. I don't know how old she was, but more often than not we would see people in their 20s and 30s in there. But she came in and I called her case and she came up and I told her where she could sit. She really looked nervous. And I asked her if she was okay. And she blurted out, "Are you going to yell at me?"
Oh.
And I said, "No, I'm not going to yell at you. Why do you think I would yell at you?" "Well, that's what they do on television." Well, it gave me an opportunity to remind not only myself, but also her, that what you see on television is intended to sell advertising and draw viewers. In the real world, it's rather mundane. Some people come in there and find it boring. We don't yell at people. And I told the lady, listen, we're working for you. I'm a branch of your government. I represent the judicial branch of your government. I'm not going to yell at you. I just want to hear what you have to say and what the other party has to say, and I'll try and make it all work out for you.
Oh, that's too good. Thought you were Judge Judy or something.
Well, I was taken by that question, and I wrote an article about it. I thought other people should know the experience that I just
Sure.
had. And at one time, I think it still exists, it was a publication known as the Indiana Lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I had periodically been asked by a friend of mine who is a judge down in Marion County if I would ever write something. And I said, well, if I think of anything, I will. Because they always wanted to have a judge publish an article in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I called him up and said, I've got one for you. And I did. I wrote an article, and it was published in the Indiana Lawyer. It's been several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important that people realize that we are working for the people that come before us. We didn't ask you to come in. Somebody filed a lawsuit. One party did it. The other party has to respond to it, or normally will respond to it. And so it's important that they know that they are entitled to dignity and respect in the courtroom, and that starts with the judge. If the judge is being sensible about things, keeping an even keel, not yelling at people, not doing what I consider unethical acts in the way they treat people, then things get done in a pretty timely fashion. And if you can explain to somebody why you made the decision that you made, even though they might not have gotten the call that they wanted, they didn't get what they had asked for, or they had to pay something they weren't sure they had to pay. Something I've always tried to do, and I know other judges do as well, this is my decision, and here's why.
That's excellent.
My job is to figure out the facts for you folks, and then my job is to apply legal principles to those facts and try and come up with the best decision that I can. And once they know that this is why the judge did what he or she did, then for the most part, they're set. They were listened to.
Yeah.
They were taken seriously. And I think it's very important for any judge to remember that.
Sure.
We're working for them.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to take a little sidestep here for a second.
Okay.
I've been copying library board meeting minutes. I have trouble with that. And I have run across your mother's name several times.
Yes.
Beryl was a marvelous lady.
Yeah, my sister and I were lucky. Yes.
She was quite the lady, and I just wanted to mention her in this.
Thank you.
She was quite a library supporter and just all around sweet person.
Well, that's nice of you to say. I agree with you. My sister and I both had very special parents, and a lot of what we have become, we certainly owe to them. My mother was the secretary of the library board for years and years and years.
The minutes I'm doing right now, she was the president of the board. But for years she was the secretary. She and Frances Brown traded it back and forth.
They did, yes. And Frances was a great lady, too.
Oh, yes.
We lost a couple of real good ones.
We sure did.
And my mother, it's almost 2 years now that she passed away, and Frances has passed away since then.
Right.
Those ladies were in their 90s.
Yep.
They were doing the best
ambitious
they could.
library supporters, so
Yes,
we're grateful for them.
Yes.
And Beryl did a good job.
Yes, she took that very seriously.
Yeah.
She was a lot like her mother. Her mother was born in 1899, and she was 21 in 1920.
Wow.
Which just happened to be the year that women first got the right to vote.
Sure.
And she voted, that would be my grandmother, voted in the very first election that women could vote. And for the rest of her life, until she died, she never missed an election.
Well, bless
Never
her
missed
heart.
one. But she inculcated, I think, the spirit of giving back, service, voting, however you want to describe that, to her children. kind of think that that was passed on from my dad and mother
Sure.
to lend it me.
Sure, sure. Well, I really appreciate you coming down and talking to us. I learned quite a bit today,
Good.
really.
Good.
And good luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you, Deb. It's been a pleasure.